Hey guys, welcome to Herding Little Cows. So this is part 2 on our series about Josiah and his cerebral palsy. So just for those who did not watch yesterday, Josiah is 7.5. He will be 8 in July, right? And he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy officially at the age of 4, but we knew there was a problem at around 9 months. And we had a working diagnosis of cerebral palsy at 10 months. So we ended the story there yesterday where we got the working diagnosis from seeing that he had no growths in his brain and that therapy would be the next step. So we came home and worked with CDS, which is Child Developmental Services, something like that. Here in the state of Maine, it's run through the state, and up until the age of 3, they come into your house to give services. And after the age of 3, you can send them to like a preschool type program there at the office. So we started working with them right then at about 10 months old. We had 2 workers come to the house and evaluate him by doing different tests of, if they put something down, would he reach for it? If they put something under a blanket, did he know that it was under the blanket? A whole bunch of tests to see where he was developmentally. And so again, this was when he was 10 months old, and they found out what kind of therapies he needed. And we had an occupational therapist coming into the house on a regular basis. She was coming, I think, once a week to start with, and then once every other week she was coming out, and she would give us ideas. She would work with him for the hour, show us ways to work with him, and then we would do exercises with him while he was gone. Also during that time, we looked into teachings from the Family Hope Center. We have a friend who works with the Family Hope Center to get training to do missionary work in Cambodia, working with kids with special needs. So we looked into some of their ideas, and we really liked it, but we were never able to go to their office there in Pennsylvania. And it's I think 2-day, 3-day evaluation. I forget. They teach parents how the brain works, and then they do an evaluation of your child and give you the therapy steps you should be working on. But from looking at how their program works and how they go back to the very basics of, like, did you learn to crawl? Because if your body didn't learn to crawl, you are missing some of the connections that go on in the brain. And they've done a lot of research that even children at the age of 12, 14 that are having issues with reading, if they go back to crawling, it can really, really influence how well they're able to learn, and they can learn a lot better. So between those things, the Family Hope Center and the CDS people that were coming into the house, and I had worked with special needs while I was in high school. There was a life skills class, I think that's what it was called, where they took kids that were going to probably be moving from their parents' home into a group home, people who would be able to maybe hold down a job, but would need help, figuring out their checkbooks and making sure the bills got paid and taking their medicines, that type of thing. So I was working in that classroom. There were a lot of different variations of disabilities that were in that classroom, so I learned to work with a lot of different students. But they were there were some very tough cases, some very physically needy children and things like that. So I had done that through high school. Also, I had worked at a summer camp, which is where Mark and I met, and that's a whole nother story. But that summer camp, there was special needs kids that we worked with, special needs adults we worked with. So I had experience working with special needs. But when you have a child with a diagnosis and you're worried about people making sure you're doing enough, and at the time we didn't really know he had cerebral palsy and we were trying to make sure we were doing enough, we definitely liked the encouragement of the therapist coming in and helping us know what the next thing to do was. We also had a lot of help from our friend who's the missionary in Cambodia. Her name is Jennifer Him, and she was just a great encouragement, helping us just see what was going on with Josiah, as she had adopted some kids that had special needs and worked with kids with special needs. And also my friend Rachel Campbell, whose daughter has cerebral palsy also, and so she had already been through this journey, and I would just call her up and be like, okay, so what's the next step? What do I need to do next? And every case of CP is different. There's such a wide variety. Mark, when he was growing up, had a friend with CP who, if you watched her carefully, you could see she slightly walked with a limp, and that was all she had. And the girl that I worked with at camp and some other students that I had were fully involved, that they were in a wheelchair and they were nonverbal and they had limited knowledge of the world around them that they were able to share with us. Not that they didn't know, but that they were able to share with the people around them. So there's all different cases. And we weren't sure what we were going to be dealing with Josiah. So between all those people, we had Lynn, the therapist, coming into our house on a regular basis, and she would give us ideas to work with Josiah. Well, as time went on and I was starting to feel a little more confident of parenting a child who had these issues, we were actually getting ahead of Lynn. I remember one week she came, and Virginia, who was, I'm trying to think, she would have been about 8 at the time that this was all happening. She took Josiah under her wing and became his little therapy buddy. And so she would work with him doing stuff. And I remember one time Lynn coming to the house and saying, okay, this week we're going to work on stairs. We lived in a house that had about 3 steps going in and out of the house. But he wasn't really good enough to do steps yet, so I didn't trust him when it was gravel and cement outside. But Virginia had, the week before, Lynn mentioned this, Virginia had taken pillows and had stacked them up in such a way that he had to, crawl these stairs in the living room made out of these pillows. And so Lynn came and said, we're going to do stairs. And Virginia's like, we already practiced that. Do you want to see him do it? And at about that time, we were moving to a new house. So it was our 6-month evaluation. Like every 6 months, they reevaluate for the program. And we were going to be moving to a different county, which means you have to work with a different CDS program and everything. So through that, we had the therapist and the director, or whoever he was, come to the house and do the evaluation. And they both decided that because of the work we were doing at home and all the progress that Josiah was making, that we could discontinue the CDS services. So that would have been at about 18 months. The biggest things we were working on was Josiah. When they first came into the house, Josiah could not sit up. He was not very stable sitting up. I guess he could a little bit, but he couldn't catch himself at all if he were to start to fall to his left. He didn't know to put that arm out. So working with him of sitting up and putting his arm out and having him fall on his arm, like a controlled tipping him that way so he could feel how to catch himself. Also working with him on eating. That was our biggest challenge because Josiah's mouth does not sense things the way that our mouth does, and his tongue does not work the way that our tongue does. So anytime we would put food in his mouth, if it was anywhere near the middle or the left side of his mouth, he would gag on it because his mouth didn't know what to do. We finally figured out, good job, you got them all? Nice job. Can you mix them all up again and then do them by color? We finally found out after months of therapy, and just trial and error, that if we put food into the right side of his mouth, he could feel it and he could swallow it. So that would be putting the food directly there. So this little boy didn't eat any solid food other than some controlled tries until he was 18 months old. He was purely breastfed because he didn't know what to do with a cup. He couldn't figure out what to do with a bottle. His mouth just did not function correctly. And it's amazing that we never had eating issues with him because we found out later in life, when he was about 2 or 3, that he also has a tongue tie. So between the CP and the tongue tie, we should have had some feeding issues, and those were never a problem for us. So that did help a lot to have the therapist in the house to kind of work through some of those things. I don't know that I would have had the knowledge. It was nice to have the encouragement of them as I was trying these different feeding things. That was the most scary thing because he would gag on everything I would feed him. So just having the encouragement of them to continue pressing on and doing that. So that therapy ended at about 16, 18 months old. I don't remember exactly. And we moved into a new house, and Josiah continued to just do things that they didn't think he'd be able to do. They thought that he wouldn't be able to, like, they didn't know if he'd ever progress into walking, talking, those different things. When he was 2 years old, when he was about to turn 2 years old, my dad passed away. And a few weeks after that, on his second birthday, he decided to start walking, which is great for a child with CP. 2 years old is not a bad time to start walking. Well, he decided to take his first steps in the kiddie wading pool. You know, we had like this much water in the bottom of one of those kiddie wading pools, and he decided he wanted to see you. Yeah, you.
So can I tell?
Want to tell what? Yeah, go ahead.
What
Go ahead.
did
Yep.
I break?
Your ankle?
I broke my ankle.
Yeah. So in the kiddie wading pool, this much water, you know, mommy right there, he decides to stand up. So I hold on to his hands and he takes his first steps. Why he chose to start there, I don't know. But, you know, when a kid takes their first steps, it's not consistent. So 2 or 3 days later, we decide to try to show Daddy, because with Daddy's work schedule and everything, Josiah just was never wanting to do it at the time, you know, at a different time. So it was 2 or 3 days later, we're showing Daddy how good he walks. And we actually have the video camera on because we want to show everybody, you know, we want to have this momentous occasion on video. Well, he walks back and forth between us, and he leaves Daddy's arms and comes to me, and I see his ankle turn, and just a blood-curdling scream comes out of this child. And he had stepped on his foot wrong and broken the growth plate in his ankle. Josiah, because of the CP, like, this isn't a super uncommon injury, but because of the CP, he probably was stepping wrong, and had he been able to feel his left ankle, he probably would have stopped putting weight on it had he felt it hurting. But because he can't feel, he just continued stepping, and it fractured the growth plate. We actually did not know for 2 or 3 days that it had actually broken, because he hadn't been walking before this. So his normal mode of transportation up to this point was walking on his knees. And he would come up to the side of like the bed and he'd stand up, but then he'd pick up his left foot because he didn't want to bear weight on it. So we called the doctor. They said to wait another day. Called the next day, said he's still not putting weight on it. They had us come in, but he's not really seeming in pain other than the blood-curdling scream when it first happened. But at this point, I was still nursing him, so I nursed him. He calmed down, never really complained of the pain again, probably because he can't feel very much on that left side. But we ended up taking him to the doctor. The doctor did an x-ray. The doctor didn't see anything wrong. Told us to wait again a day or two, I forget what it was, to go to the orthopedic doctor if he was still having a problem. We knew the orthopedic doctor. They looked at the x-ray, and yes, it was broken, but because it's the growth plate, it doesn't look like a normal break on a bone, because the growth plate shows up differently on the x-ray. You have to know what swelling to look for and stuff. So all that to say, Josiah didn't start walking until 2. In any pile you want. Josiah didn't start walking till he was 2. Broke his ankle a couple days later. Didn't start walking again till 2.5. When one day he just decided to stand up and started walking between the furniture in the living room. And very quickly learned how to walk past that point. But again, the doctors didn't know that he'd be able to do that. So that was a momentous occasion for us. So he did therapy till 18 months. Started to try to walk at 2. Got a cast. Started walking again at 2.5. Around 3, I think it was, we ended up getting a AFO brace for his left foot because his foot is turning in. It still continues to do that, so he still has a brace. But that was his first brace, which we used for a little while till he outgrew it, and they decided he was learning to walk well enough that he didn't need it, but that has come back now. And yeah, I think that was kind of where we stopped at that point. We were moving forward with doing therapies at home. I had some friends, like I was mentioning, who have kids with special needs, so I would ask them, you know, how do I do this next step? With my background in doing special needs, I was feeling confident that I could help my child, and you know, looking stuff up on the internet, continuing therapies and games and things at home. So that's where we're going to leave you right now. And next time we will talk about when he was almost 4 and we started noticing some unusual symptoms, and we had a weekend of him being very, very sick and very, very like throwing up and everything, and ending up to have to go to the emergency room. Well, I don't know if we went to the emergency room. The doctor and the neurologist and the official diagnosis of CP. So we will talk about that one in the next series, in the next part of this series. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.
What? Daddy.
You want to show? Well, here, let me show on the camera. Did you get them all there? There you go. He put all the colors together. Good job, little guy.